Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, the third one for today, the 12th of April 2024, the Geopolitical update. Thank you so much to Da Vinci, I've seen a picture now of him in a hoodie with this design, which is thanks to Chris from Clockwork Design, who put these together. And he's got a hoodie and he looks amazing. It's a beautiful thing. I think I've won life when I've seen another human being wear a piece of merch I didn't even design it. Goodness me. Anyway, I feel I've won life. Right. Unfortunately, there are many people who are not winning life at the moment, and it's far more serious than my witterings. So we go to Ukraine and what is happening and what is going on geopolitically around the world to either support Ukraine or work against Ukraine. We're going to start with the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who spoke to Congress yesterday and said this. And I think this is a really important speech. It was. We'll go through it now, see what you guys think.
The world needs the United States to continue playing this.
Sorry, start that again.
The world needs the United States to continue playing this pivotal role in the affairs of nations. And yet, as we meet here today, I detect an undercurrent of self-doubt among some Americans about what your role in the world should be. This self-doubt is arising at the time when our world is at history's turning point. The post-Cold War era is already behind us, and we are now at inflection point that will define the next stage of human history. The international order that the U.S. worked for generations to build is facing new challenges. Challenges from those with values and principles very different from ours. Freedom and democracy are currently under threat around the globe.
This is typically polite Japanese speak for sort it out, US, because the world's falling apart. And you guys, you need to readopt your position of leading the world. And at the moment, you ain't. Basically, I see this as Kishida looking at the US and their response to Ukraine and the paralysis from Congress and saying, holy crap, like we in Japan are looking at what's going on with China next door and Taiwan, and we're looking to the Indo-Pacific, and there's ourselves, South Korea and Australia, and we're cacking ourselves, and you have receded from being this hegemonic leader in the world order to have some crisis of self-confidence in terms of who you think you are. Some of you think you should be receding from the world. Some of you think you're isolationist, or some of you are isolationist and think the US shouldn't be the entity that it has been for so long. And actually, even if you are against American imperialism, etc., look at the alternative. Would you prefer the American style of imperialism, or would you prefer the Chinese, Russian style of imperialism? Because I know which one I would prefer. As imperfect as the American hegemonic order is, it's very much preferable to the alternative. And so I think Kishida is very expectedly underplaying that or euphemizing what he's trying to say there with polite speak. But this is some serious stuff going on, and I think the message, when you pair it back, is fairly clear there, and he is well on side with the kind of globalist approach to American positioning and getting much more involved in supporting Ukraine as a very clear message to send to China vis-a-vis Taiwan. Now, the UN Assistant Secretary General says Russia's war is an existential threat to the people of Ukraine. It's good to see the UN is speaking up again. They've been a bit absent, but, you need to... I will remind you that I did... In fact, let's go and find that to remind you more explicitly. If you go to my channel, and go to the live... tab, then you will see a little bit further down here I did a chat with where are you are about here somewhere, concerning the position of Russia in the UN and the fact that they really shouldn't be in the UN, and in fact technically they aren't in the UN. Here we go. Live discussion: kicking Russia out of the UN Security Council, or indeed Russia isn't even in the United Nations, as I retitled it there. That's a really important chat with Talaria, W_bin in the chats. We had a chat about the situation of Russia with regard to the United Nations, and indeed somebody thought that such an important chat that they have recorded it to a CD or a DVD and sent that out to a bunch of politicians around. So I don't know how successful that would be in convincing anyone, whether they'd even watch it, but thank you so much for doing that, and obviously taking on board that chat enough to think it was important for other people to see. But anyway, the UN is a bit of a problematic organization in terms of Russia's position in the UN Security Council and the veto they've ended up having. The escalation of Russia's war against Ukraine is a, quote, direct threat to regional stability and international security, and an existential threat to the people of Ukraine, which is the correct rhetoric, but, where do you go from there? Zelensky and Ukraine have no choice but to continue the fight, says Finnish President Alexander Stubb. We can either help Ukraine or sink into the oblivion of history, allowing Putin to continue his conquests. Very strong rhetoric there from the Finnish president. And of course, the Finns are, unlike the UN, the Finns can actually do something about this situation, and they can back their rhetoric up with military assistance, and they do regularly. That is a continued comfort to the Ukrainians that they do have the support of the Baltic neighbours and their Scandinavian neighbours. Excellent stuff. The presidents of Ukraine and Romania discuss cooperation in the defence sector. They also discuss the work of Ukraine's export corridor with Romania and Moldova. Quote, in the face of Russian aggression, the Ukraine-Romania tandem makes a significant contribution to global food security. And indeed, that is absolutely true. It helps Ukraine financially, economically, to a massive degree. And this is the importance of that land corridor going from the Dnipro River, where it presently is, that the Russian control. If they were to cross there, go past Mykolaiv, get to Odessa, and therefore onto Transnistria, the Russians would cut Ukraine off from exports, the ability to export goods through the massive port of Odessa and other ports, including Remy and Ishmael on the Danube River, and they would starve Ukraine of economic income. It would be an absolute disaster if that happens, and I think that's why France recognises that Odessa as a red line for them. They would get involved if Russia were to move on Odessa, and it's so important. That relationship with Romania is insanely important, and there are now alternative land routes through Romania, given the border issues with Poland that have existed, and indeed Slovakia and Hungary. Right, moving on. Zelensky held his first meeting with President Tamas Sulyok of Hungary. They discussed preparations for the Global Peace Summit. So this is the president, not the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. Quote, invited Hungary to participate in the summit, proposed to join the G7 Vilnius Declaration of Support for Ukraine and start working on a bilateral security agreement. Thank you for supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Zelensky said. Of course, he has a very difficult path to tread there with regard to where Hungary sit, where Viktor Orban sits. I'm not wholly sure of the presidential position there, Sulyok's position with regard to Ukraine. Like we saw with Slovakia previously, their former president was very much pro-Ukraine, and the Prime Minister, Robert Fico, not so much. Now that's changed with both President and Prime Minister now on the pro-Russian side of the fence. And indeed, let's move to Slovakia. So Robert Fico has evidently met with Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Slovakia fully supports Ukraine's EU membership. This is really good news. Bratislava, capital of Slovakia, I've been there, very nice, will not block Kyiv's accession to the European Union, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said during a press conference with his Ukrainian counterpart Denis Shmyhal in Slovakia. So that's really good news. I would love to know the other details of that meeting, anything else that came out of that. Of course, Slovakia no longer giving military aid to Ukraine with Fico taking over and his administration, although their defense manufacturing industry does support Ukraine, with as in they provide aid to anyone that buys it off them that then supports Ukraine. But as far as the government's concerned, there is no bilateral aid going. Now, media is reporting that the EU is to consider additional restrictions on Ukrainian carriers in Poland. This is incredibly important because the hauliers and the farmers have been up in arms and blocking these entrances and exits to Poland and Ukraine, such that it has cost the Ukrainians a massive amount of money in lost revenue from imports and exports. This absolutely needs to be solved. It should have already been solved, but it hasn't. It's a difficult one. The EU wants to do Ukraine a favour by giving them preferential trade agreements, giving them access to the EU as a trade bloc, frictionless trade, help out Ukraine. However, the flip side of doing that is hauliers are like, hang on, they're not paying into the EU, and yet they are able to flood our marketplaces, the Ukrainians, with cheaper, less regulated haulage and agricultural produce. And that's the core issue, it seems to me, that's been going on. And so there needs to be some agreement between the nations or between Ukraine and the EU to try and stop those people from blocking the borders so with such huge effect. The European Commission is reportedly considering new restrictions on Ukrainian carriers transporting goods through Poland. Polish media outlet RMF24 reported today. Apart from additional checks, GPS devices could be installed on the vehicles, allowing tracking of their destination in Poland and ensuring compliance with their declarations, according to RMF24's sources. Could well be good news going forward, and hopefully that issue can be sorted out sooner rather than later. According to a study carried out by a couple of French organisations, let's see, that is Centre de Recherche Politique de Sciences Po. So that's a Centre for Political Research at Sciences Po, and another organisation, strategic research organisation. The war is at the heart of the concerns of 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, I found this really interesting because I was wondering only yesterday, because I walk around, I stumble around everywhere thinking, oh my God, we're in World War III. Russia thinks we're actually in World War IV. What's going on? The world is going to hell in a handcart, and we need to be doing everything we can concerning Ukraine. I'm sure many of you think similarly. And then I sort of look at people around just going about their daily business, not giving a flying fig about what's going on, and arguably not knowing. And I think particularly about young people, or maybe they are more engaged in a way, got a handle on social media, or maybe not. Like, what do average people think? Well, I'm not saying I'm more than average, but the average Joe on the road, what do they think about Ukraine? What do they know about Ukraine? What do young people think and know? Here, this is really good news from this, and I don't know the methodology, I don't know how representative this is, but half of French people from 18 to 25 say they would be prepared to put on a uniform and fight at the front in Ukraine if France decided to go to war. That is phenomenal, right? That's absolutely incredible. Quote, regarding the war in Ukraine, 1 in 2 young French people say they know what is happening there. 71% of young men admit to regularly following the development of the conflict, compared to 56% of young women. 73% of them fear that the conflict will spread beyond Ukraine's borders, and those under 35 are more in favour of sending troops, 31%, than those over 50, 17%. That is an incredible set of statistics. Again, are they representative? But I swear that's going to be more than in the UK. I think that Emmanuel Macron has been doing the right thing, which is very clearly communicating how serious this thing is and doing that to the French public. And I think that is the spoils of his efforts there. I think that we in the UK, and I've talked about this very explicitly previously, have failed in trying to communicate from the top down the importance of the Ukraine war. Like, it's Emmanuel Macron that sat down on national television with a massive audience and for half an hour told people why the shit has hit the fan and what France is doing about it and why he sees it as one of the most important issues for France at the moment and for the EU. And there's an existential connection to the outcome of the war, so the outcome of, or the future of France and the future of the EU is existentially linked to the future or the outcome of the war in Ukraine. And in the UK, we haven't done that. Where's Rishi Sunak? Yeah, he might say the right things occasionally, in those little snippets. Ukraine's really serious, blah, 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 blah. But he leaves that kind of rhetoric to people like David Cameron. David Cameron might go and say exactly the right things. I think he does. I think he's doing a really good job going around the world and saying that stuff. But how's that getting communicated to the British public? Who is talking to the 18 to 25-year-olds here? What job has our government done to say how serious global politics is right now and how that might affect our economy and how that might affect, our safety and security and how cyber warfare and information warfare might be affecting us and our freedoms, etc., etc. So I think France has done a good job of that. UK hasn't. Let me know what your countries have done or haven't done and how you think your young people feel about the war in Ukraine, about Russia and about Ukraine. Now, I get a sense that Gaza is very much on people's lips. And I do think there's a bit of a smashing together of those ideas. I've had arguments with people previously that have been pro-Palestine, which I am that. I agree with them. And then they've come out with some pro-Russian narrative because the messaging has been merged, often nefariously by Russia, or just by point of fact that those kind of people who are overtly supportive of Palestinians, I'm not talking about Hamas, I'm talking about Palestinians here, are more likely to think that the US is imperialistic, right? And therefore might look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine and think Ukraine's part of US imperialism and therefore Russia are justified in doing what they're doing or whatever. So I think there's some messaging stuff that's mixed up there. And I think I would like to think, or I'd hope that people can tease those things apart and have differing views on both these things that are essentially accurate. And hopefully the French have that. And I think in order for our young people or anyone in society to have the correct understanding of these two messy conflicts, we need to be talking about them in public spaces in a very clear fashion. There needs to be very good explanations of what's going on. And I don't know if that's definitely happening. Anyway, moving on. Less than a year after assisting in overthrowing the government in Niger, the Russians are now training the new military. Who knew that would happen? The resources of Africa will feed Putin's war machine just as the resources of Ukraine will, says Jane Kiev. The West has no idea what's coming. I think part of why I think France is reacting so much to the Ukraine war will have this as I think this is a variable in France's calculations, in Macron's calculations. The pushing out of France and its influence in the Sahel region of Africa and all over the continent, and then replacing France with Russia in a very similar neo-colonialistic way, near-colonial way. I think that's part of France's positioning. It is worrying that Russia is having this success in certain parts of the world than it is indeed having. And so with that in mind, the next bit of news I think is you might think is remarkable, but actually you can see what's going on here. Ukraine, in a position it's in, with the lack of money and resources it has opened embassies in the Ivory Coast and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So two African nations, and Ukraine has opened embassies there. What's going on there? And of course, this is a tussle. We've seen that the special forces, Ukrainian special forces, have been destroying Russian targets within Sudan. And there's that conflict in Sudan that's also taking place. Russians involved there, Ukrainians involved there. And it's a fight away from home. Why are the Ukrainians wasting their time and resources and money on striking in Russia? Because it's striking in Africa, because that's where Russia is getting its finances from. And that's how it's partly bankrolling its war in Ukraine. So Ukraine is doing everything it can to fight against Russian expansionism in Africa. And this is part of that. I just think it's quite fascinating. But on the other hand, yeah, I can understand why they do that. Now, the Crocus City Hall terrorist attack that took place recently, where members of ISIS attacked citizens who were at that music venue. It was all horrific, 150 odd people dying. And then it was all blamed on Ukraine and all blamed on the US and UK, etc., etc. But it was Tajiks who did it, and then they've been tortured in prison, and then have recently come out and said, yeah, I know I haven't got an ear, and my face is beaten, but it was Ukraine what did it. Have I said the right thing? You know, they've been tortured to say that. Well, I've been wondering what the Tajik response would be to this. So Tajik foreign minister saying cutting off ears of Tajiks is unacceptable. Well, I think that's very much the minimum you could say. Tajik foreign minister condemned the torture of suspected Crocus terrorists by Russian security services. Sirajuddin Mukridin said that as a result of the ill-conceived information campaign, negative perceptions about Tajik citizens and Tajiks are being formed. Absolutely, they are being persecuted within Russia at the moment as a result of that terrorist attack. And I think Tajikistan, well, it would be nice if this was a good opportunity for them to move further from the sphere of influence of Russia, but I don't know what will happen. I don't know enough about what's going on there. Switzerland will decide in the coming days whether to invite Russia to the peace conference in Ukraine, not in Ukraine. That would be highly controversial. The foreign minister has said Russia has repeatedly said it does not intend to take part in this event. Estonia is rightly debating, says Jay in Kyiv, designating the Russian Orthodox Church a terrorist organisation. Indeed, the Russian Orthodox Church isn't a church, but an appendage of Putin's global terror machine. Now, rhetoric aside, there is definitely something to this, and this is why Estonia is saying what they're saying. It has been a way that Russia has able to they've used the Russian Orthodox Church within Ukraine as a way of getting information out of Ukraine, of doing kind of espionage work. Russian Orthodox Church has long been used by Russian intelligence services, and this goes back a long time. This goes back into the Cold War. So the history of the Russian Orthodox Church, I mean, there was a time where pretty much every priest was expected to be like a KGB agent. In fact, Patriarch Kirill is a former KGB agent. Like the patriarchate or the patriarch of the church is a former KGB agent, or still in effectively the KGB or FSB as it now is. So this is, you could, if you wanted, go, oh, look at this persecution of Christians. It's nothing of the sort. This is Russia using tools at its disposal as a means to an end. And this is why the Ukrainians have been trying to move their church over from Russian dominance back to a kind of Ukrainian, Kiev-centered patriarchate and essentially organization. And interesting that the Estonians are recognizing that nefarious dimension to the Russian Orthodox Church. Putin has long used the church in terms of controlling the public, going down the whole traditional values route, but it's a way of getting conformity. And I've talked about this many times before, but if you are a dictator, you want a pliable population, and populations are more pliable when they completely conform to one identity, if you like. You say, right, this is the identity we want as a dictatorship, or I want as a dictatorship. And if you take on those characteristics as a people, then you'll fit into our plans and our sense of what reality is and what our country is and what our economy is. When you talk about the psychology of politics, political psychology here, and you talk about what liberals, small L liberals and small C conservatives have as their characteristics, openness to new experiences is very much associated with liberals and not with conservatives. And with that, you also have a propensity to be a bit more anti-authoritarian. Although authoritarian to libertarian exists on a different axis to left-right economics, and that's why the quadrant is better than just the spectrum. But generally speaking, your liberal is more likely to go, yeah, screw you, you can't tell me what to do. I'm a liberal, I've got my own sense of who I am. I've got my own independence. I'm an independent thinker, and I'm going to experience new things and stuff like that. So that is generally the characteristics, or more likely to be the characteristics of a liberal, as according to the moral foundations theorizing of people like Jonathan Haidt, etc., etc. Okay. So when it comes to Putin, I mean, this all makes total sense, right, psychologically. When it comes to Putin saying, right, I want to control my population, if I have liberals running around going, yeah, screw you, I'm not going to do what you tell me, I've got my own sense of who I am, and if you can't tell me what sexuality I have, and I'm going to be, this kind of identity, I'm going to go and do that, and then you've got, it's like herding cats. You've got everyone going around being all independently minded. You're like, hang on, I'm a dictator, and you're all supposed to be doing what I have in my head as what you should be doing. And you're not. You're just piddling about saying you are what you are. And therefore, I need to stop that from happening. And one way of doing that is almost getting society to start controlling that by saying, okay, let's get the church involved, and we're going to go down the traditional values where homosexuality is bad, LGBTQ identities are now, I mean, they are literally seen as extremist. It's like, so you've got like extremist terrorism if you are propagating ideas of sexual liberation. But it's all a way of getting your population to conform to this very explicit and narrow sense of identity. And I think the Russian Orthodox Church has been co-opted for a very long time, but particularly since sort of in the last 2000, I wrote an article in 2017 on this, going back to 2012. There are big movements of the church to get of Putin's governance and getting the church on board to fulfill his objectives there. So, anyway, I digress, as I often do. Russian media is reporting that Chinese banks are blocking payments from Russia for electronic parts. Now, this would be incredible if this is widespread and continues, and there are no loopholes to this. Chinese banks have been blocking payments from Russia's companies for electronic component purchases since late March, according to Kommersant. Really good news. that's so important. Now, Lukashenko, the Belarusian dictator, and Putin, the Russian dictator, have held a 4-hour meeting in Moscow where those two dictators have got together and sorted out how best to control their populations. Belarusian dictator Lukashenko and his Russian counterpart, I like that, Putin, had held a nearly 4-hour meeting yesterday, late into yesterday, according to the Russian state-controlled news agency RIA Novosti. What they discussed, I don't know. But it is interesting that Lukashenko's come out and said, quote, Belarus is not entering the war against Ukraine because the border is barricaded, so we cannot get there. And this is as a result of Ukraine spending an awful lot of time building fortifications and mining the border to the north, to the point where if Belarus did attack, it would be a bit of a nightmare. It's not only is it topographically very difficult around the Belarusian border, you've got marshes and rivers and all sorts of stuff in that northwest of Ukraine. It would just be really difficult for Belarus to properly attack from there. And so it's interesting that he's come out and said, ain't going to happen. The Ukrainian border is completely mined and concreted. 120,000 Ukrainian troops are stationed there, he added. I doubt that's the case. Those 120,000 would be very useful down on the Eastern Front. However, if he does say that, he said that, I wonder if it's like a bluff. Oh, we're not going to attack. They all go down to the Eastern Front. He goes, okay, turns out we're going to attack. I severely doubt that he would do that. It would be an absolute domestic political blunder for him to do that. And it would, not go well for him in Belarus. And I don't think there'll be any appetite in the Belarusian public. I mean, he is a dictator that has been put in the last election. He didn't win it. He was essentially put there by Putin. It was all rigged and whatnot. He had a previously highly controversial route to leadership. And so I think he knows the reality of which way the wind is blowing in Belarus. And that's why over the course of this war, he's only done the bare minimum to support Putin. Putin's wanting him to get properly involved, and he has not done it. And even his foreign minister was murdered by Putin. I mean, goodness me, assassinated by Putin as a warning shot to him to toe the line. And Lukashenko does kind of toe the line, but only just. He only does the bare minimum. The sort of things he does do is this. So this is back on the agenda. This has happened before, but it's now being reported in a more widespread manner. Migrants are storming the Polish border. Polish border guards have prevented a massive attempt to breach the border. An aggressive crowd of migrants from Africa and the Middle East tried to enter Poland through Belarus. Illegals, as it says here, were about 220 people. They pelted border guards with stones. Now, this has long been claimed that the Polish border and indeed some of the Baltic borders have been used by Belarus to stoke migration issues within the borders of Europe. Poland has complained previously that Belarus has basically, collected migrants and then supposedly kind of stoked them up and thrown them at the border and said, go and cause some trouble, and given them tools to get across the border because it sows discontent and disharmony within the other side of the border, wherever it may be. Here, next is reporting in Poland, more than 600 attempts to illegally cross the border from Belarus were recorded in just 2 days. The migrants behaved aggressively, throwing branches and stones at border guards and using gas against them. That is happening, and it could well be a bit of a challenge to the Polish there. Now, as we are grappling with this new geopolitical world that we're living in at the moment, and with the militarization, or arguably not the militarization of certain countries, but maybe the need for militarization or reinvesting in our militaries. There have been different countries saying, hey, we're not prepared. We've got NATO saying, and the EU saying, we need to be prepared. We're looking like we're entering a phase of pre-war, or indeed some people saying war. This is a world war, or it's pre-world war. what are we doing about it? And then I reported the other day that the UK were being criticised, the government was being criticised for not having like war games or got any plans prepared for any kind of eventuality. And then the government hastily put something together and said, yes, we have. We've just done some war gaming or whatever. Now we've got an article in the Daily Telegraph, which is actually essentially just a kind of a bit of PR for the government. Is written by a defence procurement minister. UK Minister on Industry Government Collaboration says that change is happening and we are building those relationships. We're already sharing secret data with trusted partner companies from wargaming exercises in Ukraine's front line. This is James Cartledge, who is the MP, as is the Member of Parliament, Minister of State for Defence Procurement. Saying quite a bit in this, but you've got to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt because it is basically a bit of a PR job. So I worked with the Defence Secretary to press fast forward on a better solution so that we had in the pipeline Dragonfire. So a lot of this is about the new laser thing, Dragonfire, which is going to go on Royal Navy ships within 5 years and is possibly going to go to Ukraine even sooner. Dragonfire technology will engage aerial targets at the speed of light for just £10 a shot, and with our extra investment and agility, it will be operational on Royal Navy ships in 2027 rather than 2032. So expediting that, that's your big headline thing. Oh, look what we're doing. But actually, it's also, this is about getting together with the defence sector, working with government, private and public sectors working together with the Defence Ministry, the Navy, Army, Air Force to get stuff done. And I think there's panic going on among many nations, no doubt, about how well prepared people are if there is genuinely going to be a threat of a wider conflict outside of the borders of Ukraine. What's going on in the Middle East? What's possibly going to go on in the Indo-Pacific? All these flashpoints in the world. How well funded are our armed forces? How well have we strategically planned, etc., etc. And so, although this might be a little bit of PR, it is reflective of the fact that they are thinking about things now. Stuff is happening, balls are rolling, and I'm sure that's the case right across Europe. And in many countries around the world. There's talk about Canada joining AUKUS, which is Australia, UK and the US getting together with submarine manufacturing and design and manufacturing. And Canada might be coming on board with that in order to get submarines working under the Arctic and whatnot. So there are allies starting to get together and go, ooh, hang on, what are we doing? This has gone full circle back to Kishida going to Congress and saying, you guys need to be top of the world. And we're over there and we're thinking a lot about China, Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific in general. What's going on, guys? Because it looks like there's a bit of chaos going on and some of you guys just want to crawl under there and hide under a rock. That's not cool. So there, in terms of global geopolitics, we are in a time of flux, and as Kishida himself said, and as I've said many times, we are at an inflection point in history. What are we all doing about it? And here is just a little snippet of the UK government doing something about it, possibly. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon.